You can try again.
Is that a little better?
Devices are silent. That should be pretty obvious at this point. There is an evaluation link in the description for every session. So please go and after the session, fill that out. We rely on that to improve the program for next year. So today we have Bret Feddern from the University of Iowa. He's a senior applications developer in their College of Liberal Arts and Sciences class, as they call it. And he's going to talk about Bootstrap and codeIgniter. So without, one more thing. If anybody has a question, please don't just launch right into it. I will throw you this fancy microphone. I'm not that good at throwing or at catching, but I'll try to do my best, and hopefully it'll get to you and not to your head or anything like that. So without any further ado, here's Bret.
Thank you. As James said, I'm Bret, and I'm an average developer from the University of Iowa. I want to start off with a couple disclaimers. The first one is you'll probably see me reference my notes a little bit. That's explained by the second disclaimer and the fact that I've never done this before. This is the first time I've presented a topic at a conference. And that kind of stems from an idea I had one morning while I was over-caffeinated. Since I work at the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, we don't necessarily have a budget to send the college or the department nerds like me on conferences. So, I was trying to think of a way that maybe I could, work my way into that. So I started surfing around one morning while I was over-caffeinated, and that's when I discovered the Elements conference here. And it just so happened that their proposal form was still open. So, the brainiac in me is like, if I submit a proposal and I get selected to speak, the bosses that be have to pay for me to go to this conference, right? They can't turn me down. So, I didn't tell anybody about this brainstorm. So fast forward a couple months and, I'm working, and all of a sudden I get the email in my inbox saying that I was selected to speak. And, that's when I quick hit reply and say yes. And at that point, I responded so fast that I think maybe they started to second guess their decision. But it was also at that point in time when I realized I hadn't yet told the bosses about my brilliant idea. So I needed to, convince the bosses and go talk to them. I'm obviously here today, so I guess you can understand how that conversation went. Of course, I tell you about my awesomeness way before you guys actually listen to me ramble for 30 minutes, so you might change your mind after that, I don't know. So the topic idea I submitted was based on frameworks. I tinker with front-end and back-end frameworks on a daily basis, and at the time of the proposal, I was starting to use a new one. So the idea just kind of clicked. I mean, I might as well talk about what I know. So here comes a third disclaimer. I'm not a salesman, so I'm not going to try to sell you on anything. If you like it, great. I just wanted to present on two frameworks that I really like using. When I graduated college the first time, I got a job in sales, and I was terrible at it. So I'm definitely not going to try to sell you guys on anything. So yeah. If you aren't a developer, you might not know what a framework is. So, and if you are a developer, you might wonder which frameworks to use. So, in researching for this topic, I tried to come up with a little bit of a definition for framework. So what I came up with is a framework is a set of standardized concepts, practices, and criteria for dealing with common types of problems and tasks. In the world of web development, a framework is a package of files consisting of standardized code that can be used to support websites and applications. Instead of coding the same task over and over again, we can use a framework that comes with a bunch of tasks all bundled together in a nice little package, and it helps make things a little bit quicker. So I read an article in doing my research on InfoWorld that kind of described frameworks as the new programming language, and as I was reading the article, I kind of shook my head because it really is. I mean, as you're learning a framework, although it's in a language that you likely know, it's a language of its own. So I think most developers will tell you that frameworks are essential because they help save time and effort. If you need to convince a manager or a boss type on why you should use frameworks, you can just tell them that it'll save the company a lot of time and money, which they tend to recognize. Frameworks allow us to focus on the more important aspects of an application. Rather than starting from scratch every time, I can start with a base level of a framework, and I'm already halfway there. Frameworks lead to applications that are a lot more scalable and maintainable as well, which is nice as you get into more of the development aspect. So I'm going to dive even deeper into this nerd world of frameworks and talk about MVCs. An MVC framework MVC stands for Model View Controller, and it's a software development architecture that breaks things into different layers. It separates application logic from presentation logic. So we have a model layer, which is where we keep all our database interactions. Like anytime I want to write a function to get data, insert data, manipulate data, or combine data, I throw it into a model. And we can organize that a little bit differently depending upon your application. Sometimes you'll have a model class for every entity in your database, and sometimes you'll have a model that will contain a lot of functionality based on the application or the section of the application that you're writing. So then you get into the view. The view is kind of where you keep all your markup language. It's where the UI logic is held. Then you get to the controller, which is where your business logic is. The controller controls things. So if it acts as a go-between between the model and the view. The controller's job is to translate incoming requests into outgoing responses. So I've worked with MVCs for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a difficult concept to get your mind around at first, but once you start using it, you kind of realize the benefit of using an MVC framework. To boil it down for the non-nerd among you guys, an MVC framework is just a better way to organize code, which again makes for a more scalable and sustainable application. So now we get into the difficult question, like what frameworks to use. Now, you might have certain criteria based on the platform you're using or based on the language that your team uses, but depending upon all of that, you could start to do research and find out there are a bazillion frameworks out there that you can take advantage of. As I found when I started research into this, you can get lost in a vortex of web searches and find out that you're no better off than when you started. So at that point, you might start to ask around to fellow developers on like, hey, which framework should I use? And at that point, you're going to get a different answer from each developer you talk to with a list of reasons why you should use that. So not only are there a bazillion frameworks, there are a ton of different types of frameworks. So let me get into JavaScript frameworks. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about JavaScript frameworks because I'm not knowledgeable enough in that. But, I mean, this is kind of a tricky world. JavaScript frameworks can be fun, and they can also make you want to rip your hair out. A few different ones up here, like you have Ember, you have Angular, you have React, you have Backbone, you have Polymer, you have Phantom.js. So there are a lot of them out there you can choose from, but that's kind of up to you. So then you have front-end frameworks, which I know a little bit more about. Front-end frameworks can vary differently. What I mean by it, my definition of it is like a nice little bundled package of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all bundled into one. I'm going to reference a handful of them, with Bootstrap being the most popular. I'll go into Bootstrap a little bit more in detail later on, obviously. Foundation is another popular one. If you've noticed the Elements website, I'm fairly sure that Elements uses Foundation. It looks pretty awesome. It's nice to use as well. There are a ton of other different types out there as well. You have Gumby, you have Groundwork, you have Semantic UI, you have Yama. I'm not going to really use that framework, so it doesn't really matter. Actually, it's YAML. It stands for yet another multi-column layout. But then you have more CSS-focused ones like Pure CSS, Skeleton, and those tend to be really simple. If all you want is CSS to get like a multi-grid layout, then those are perfect. So that's just a sampling of the front-end frameworks that are available. I haven't even scratched the surface yet, and a new one seems to come out every other day. So, I mean, it kind of comes down to trying one out and using which one works well for your team, which might beg you to ask why Bootstrap. Well, I mean, for me, my name starts with a B. Their logo has a B. Okay, bad jokes aside. There are actually quite a number of reasons why I chose Bootstrap. It helps that it's widely used on my campus, but beyond that, I have a quick little definition. It comes down to the community of developers using it, the documentation available on it, the responsiveness of the framework, the accessibility of the framework, the browser compatibility, the built-in components, the awesome design, the availability of third-party plugins, and the fact that when you tie all of that together, it means a much quicker application development process. It just makes things a lot easier. So when I say huge community, I mean just that. According to a site builtwith.com, there are over 7 million websites taking advantage of Bootstrap now. I referenced another website in my research that found that over 12% of all websites use Bootstrap. So with that kind of usage, it lends itself to easy learning. And by that I mean, not only is there great documentation available on the Get Bootstrap website, but there are a number of blog posts and tutorials out there that will show you how to learn, show you how Bootstrap works. Okay. Sorry, I told you this the first time. Not only that, Stack Overflow has over 65,000 questions related to Bootstrap. As a developer, I use Stack Overflow on a regular basis. It's the common place I go to look for how to do something. And the fact that 65,000 questions are out there about Bootstrap shows me that it's quite popular. And not only that, there are 16,000 developers that are following the Bootstrap tag. So I kind of theorize that if you have a Bootstrap-related question, chances are Stack Overflow already has that question answered by at least 3 or 4 different developers. Now, one of the nice things about Bootstrap is its responsiveness. I mean, most of these front-end frameworks are responsive, which is nice because we're in a world where most of our applications need to be mobile-friendly. I think I read a stat on one of the websites that over 55% of all web traffic now is from a mobile device. If you add on top of that, like a diverse environment like Penn State and Iowa, where you have a plethora of different devices, monitor sizes, things of that nature, responsiveness becomes really important to an application. I need to adjust automatically and I don't want to think about it. So Bootstrap helps me with that. I mean, with their mobile-first framework, I can just implement a grid system, use a bunch of tags or a bunch of classes for columns and rows, and the application will automatically respond accordingly. Unfortunately, the grid layout is one of the more complex things to understand within Bootstrap, but once you get the hang of it, it works fairly nicely. And I keep learning things about it every day. Like you can add multiple classes to an element, and it will just respond accordingly, which is really nice. Outside of that, it has a lot of accessibility baked in. This is one area that Bootstrap has continued to improve upon as it's gotten more popular. It has a lot of components that are using the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. What that means is a lot of their components are built with assistive technologies in mind. This makes the lives of people with disabilities that much easier, but it also makes our lives as developers a little bit easier. With a lot of it baked in, you don't necessarily have to think about it as much. So like, I have a good example up here of modals because I use modals quite heavily, but it has good examples of ARIA attributes and role attributes, which update automatically when a modal is launched. So if you look like you're inspecting an element, you can look behind the scenes and see the different transactions take place. It's very nice. On top of that, there's a nice little Bootstrap plugin by PayPal, which is built with accessibility in mind. So if you combine that with just the core functionality within Bootstrap, you're almost 75% of the way there. I mean, you're still going to have to do a lot in terms of accessibility, but it's nice to know that right out of the box, it's got a lot of what you need. Now, you hear me talking a lot about components. Bootstrap has a lot of components built in. When it comes to that, I'm talking about icons, buttons, labels, badges, alerts, progress bars, panels, navigation structures, form enhancements, modals, tabs, tooltips, accordions. To quote their documentation, holy guacamole. Yeah, I'm a dork, I'm sorry. To go along with a lot of these components, it has an awesome design. So I work with a lot of developers that couldn't care less how an application looks. They more worry about how an application works. So for those developers, they just add a few classes to their elements, and it takes their 1990s looking applications and makes them look pretty slick and responsive at the same time. So, wow, I feel like I'm speeding along here. So you wrap all of those things together, and it comes to the most tangible benefit of all, which is quick application development. So I can get an application that is responsive, accessible, looks good, and has a lot of functionality built in without having to do much work at all. Okay, so you guys might be curious to some popular websites that use Bootstrap. Twitter, obviously, then you have Hulu, the Big Ten Network. I have codeIgniter, obviously, so there's a benefit. But I did a little research because I wanted to see which schools within the Big Ten were using it, and it comes to find out that most of them are using it. I would guess that all of them are, but I wasn't able to dig that far. But just a quick glance, most of the business colleges at every school in the Big Ten uses it. Ohio State's main website, Rutgers' main website, and the University of Minnesota's main website uses Bootstrap. Okay, now we dig into backend frameworks. I'm going to talk more about PHP because that's what I use on a regular basis, and also because 80% of the web is using PHP. I was here yesterday and listened to the guy talk about security, and he kind of bashed PHP, so now I'm a little bit scared, but I kind of, most of that security related, and I kind of deal with that here in a little bit. So when I started exploring backend frameworks for my team to use, I reached out to fellow teams on campus that were using PHP. One of the teams was our HR development team, and they'd thankfully gone through this a few years ago where they prepared a nice little spreadsheet that had columns for every PHP framework that were out there and then different criteria as rows. And so they, developed some sort of algorithm, came out to 3 options. And from that, it all boiled down to one option, which was an Oracle database connection, which is why they went to codeIgniter. But, it all depends on your area of expertise. I mean, there are a lot of them out there. There's Laravel, there's codeIgniter, there's Yi, there's Zend, there's Fuel, there's Cake PHP, there's Symfony, which is what Drupal uses. So I'm sure a lot of you use Drupal on a regular basis. Drupal takes advantage of Symfony as their framework. So from all that, you might wonder why codeIgniter? Well, like I said, it helped that a few teams on my campus were using codeIgniter, so that made it a simple decision. And then when I looked a little bit further, I found out that over 240,000 websites use codeIgniter as well. So that kind of lended itself to it. But I also kind of created my own list. And the list is similar to what I saw in the spreadsheet. So codeIgniter is an MVC framework, which I wanted. It has great documentation. It's really easy to install. It's really easy to configure. It has an extremely verbose database class, which I'll get into in a little bit. It has a lot of libraries and plugins, so a lot of the core functionality is already built in. And like I said, the security was an important aspect to me. A lot of the things that the guy discussed yesterday, the framework handles by default. It has a nice little profile thing, which I'll show you. The community's huge, and then the nice little aspect is it works well on Apache and Windows. Now, some of you hardcore PHPers might wonder why the heck you would ever run PHP on Windows. Don't ask, it happens. So, let me jump into installation and configuration. I was amazed at how simple it was to download and install. When I started playing around with it, I downloaded the package, threw it on our web server, and I had it up in a matter of minutes. Now, their documentation says it's 4 easy steps. It's actually a little bit more than that, and I'll tell you why. I tend to take their main application and system folders and throw them out of the web root so they aren't directly accessible from the web. Then I also go into the configuration and tell it not to use index.php in the URL structure. And then there are also a few other things that I go into the configuration and adjust. But all told, I can have a bare bones codeIgniter site up in 5 minutes. Outside of that, like to test my theory, I used the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences as a good guinea pig. They had a lot of small old PHP applications that were just like transactional in nature. So I talked with my boss, and she said that was perfectly fine to go ahead and start throwing those into codeIgniter apps. And so it wasn't long before, like with Bootstrap and codeIgniter, I converted all of those archaic applications into nice, awesome applications, which at that point the department looked at me like, wow, you're much better than the last guy. I'm like, yeah. So with very little effort, I converted most of the department's applications into codeIgniter. Beyond that, you get into like the core of their functionality. I mean, they have a library for almost everything. There's a library for benchmarking, there's a library for caching, there's a library for calendaring, email, encryption, file uploading, form validation, languages, which is nice if you work in an environment like this and you have to worry about internationalization, pagination, unit testing, user agents. All of those are fairly obvious what they do, but they're things that I don't have to rewrite every time, or I can trust some of these libraries to do most of what I need to do. There are also helpers. Helpers are like mini libraries. There's a helper for CAPTCHAs, for manipulating cookies. I tend to write a lot of my own helpers. So I'm sure a lot of you guys that are developers have a whole file full of functions that you've written yourselves. That tends to be what I use for helpers. Like, so I have a lot of functions for a research participant database that I wrote, where I need to do like date calculations and stuff. So a lot of like age, figure out how old somebody is in weeks or days or years. I just create a little helper and I initiate that whenever I need it. I've also created ones for like labels. I have one that interacts with an API to get all the states. It's pretty nice. So on top of the built-in libraries and helpers, codeIgniter's been around for a while, so you have a lot of third-party plugins that you can take advantage of. Some of those that I've used are like FPDF. So I use FPDF when I generate mailing labels, which is nice. Then I have one for, well, the HR department uses one for OAuth. I use one for Excel manipulations. There's one for logging where I can take a lot of my errors or just any log that I want to create throughout my code and store it in a database. And then I have one for QR codes as well. Yeah, I feel like I'm rambling, so sorry. Beyond that, I get to one of the best parts of codeIgniter, which is the database class and their utilities. So they have something that's called the query builder. The query builder is kind of like their native language for interacting with the database. The benefit of this is you can have database independence. So like on campus, I have one application that communicates with a MySQL database, an Oracle database, an MS SQL database, and a few other just random things here and there. I can use the same syntax to interact with all of them, and I don't have to think about it. And where that comes into play is with a lot of your like CRUD-like applications. So if you, by CRUD I mean like your inserts, your updates, your getting, and things of that nature. So if I use their built-in query builder, I don't have to think about it too much. Like I have an example up here. I don't know if you can see it all that well, but it's an insert statement. So, I mean, with like 3 or 4 lines of code, I can insert it and I don't have to think about it. They also have something that's nice if you don't have direct access to your database, and I don't know why that might happen, but it happens. It's their database metadata. So if I just know a table name, I can feed it back and get a list of columns. I can get, what the column types might be, and sometimes that can be very beneficial when you're trying to debug something. Then you get into like other things where your DBAs will probably kill you if you use them. It's like your utilities class and your forge class. That gets into dropping tables on the fly, creating tables on the fly, dropping databases, creating databases on the fly. If your DBAs are like our DBAs, they're not going to give you permission to do that anyway, but if they do, then you could take advantage of this. I would just be very careful about doing that. Okay, so again, like I said, I referenced the guy's presentation from yesterday where he talked about security. The nice thing that codeIgniter comes with is a lot of security features. Now, at Iowa, we tend to have periodic security audits, which means the IT security office will randomly pick a department to audit, and they'll come in and they'll scan through our applications and see how vulnerable they are. So after they've scanned the applications, they'll give you back a nice little report of different things that you need to implement or do differently. codeIgniter already has a lot of that stuff built in. So it handles a cross-site scripting filter. These are mouthfuls, so sorry. It has a cross-site request forgery protection, it has form validation, and URI security. Now with the cross-site scripting filter, this is what it's looking for: common techniques that embed JavaScript and do malicious things. I can run anytime a form is submitted, I could run that data through a function called XSS clean, and it will come back and tell me what naughty things are in there. And so if I detect naughty things, that's where I throw back the message from Taken. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Taken, but it's like, I don't know who you are, I don't know what you do, but I know you're trying to do something, and I will find you. Then they also have a cross-site forgery request that I started playing with, or cross-site request forgery protection that I started playing with. So you can see here, I can go into the config file and I can just turn 2 of these things to true and it turns on. So I turn the protections true, it's on for the entire application, and I can turn another parameter to true so that it regenerates anytime a page is loaded or a form is submitted. Where that comes into play is, so if I have a form on a page, I can have a hidden input behind the scenes that stores that token. Anytime that token regenerates, it populates into that form. If somebody else is trying to submit, they don't have that correct token. So in the background logic in my controller, I can check to see if that token is correct and compared to the current token, and if it isn't, again, that's where I spit back the taken message, I don't know who you are. Or if I know it's a user, you did something stupid, the department nerd's going to yell at you. I tend to have a lot of fun with my messages to end users. So, but the benefit is I don't have to think very hardly about a lot of these things, or bigly, as Trump would say. I don't have to think very much about these things because it's already built in. The more I play with it, the easier it gets. They have a lot of other things too, they have form validation, but I tend to use different form validation. I'm more front-end oriented. I want to validate before you actually submit, so I don't take advantage of that. But one of the other things I take advantage of is their URI scripting. So they're very suppressive when it comes to what characters you can use in the URL. And that gets into a benefit when you're trying to protect against SQL injection. So it prevents a lot of those characters by default. So if someone's trying to use that to scan your application for vulnerabilities, they're just going to get an error off the bat. Okay. So one of my favorite things about this is their profiling class. This is something that I use when I'm debugging an application. Case in point, I was working on a participant registry, and I have an advanced search form where they can fill out a number of different options based on what they're looking for to see how many participants might exist upon that. And for the life of me, I could not figure out why I wasn't getting anything back. And so with a little snippet of code that I just put below where I initiate my view, it outputs a profiling class at the bottom of every page. And so with that profiling class, I can get benchmarks on how long everything takes. I can get what queries were used on the page. I can see what data was posted. I can see what data is in my get variables. I can see any config file variables or session data variables that might be in play on this page as well. And so the second I did that, it was plainly obvious because I could see the query after the form posted that, you know, like my logic was wrong in my model. I wasn't actually getting any of the filters that I thought I was. It boiled down to me using an or instead of an and, which, I mean, looking at it, I never would have guessed, but the second I saw it and didn't see my filters on the query, I knew right away. So that's one of the things that I really like about it. It's super simple to use, and it helps in terms of, you know, debugging your application, which can speed up your launch time. So there you go, Hawks. No, so I mentioned before that there are several teams on campus using codeIgniter. There are even more using Bootstrap. So I mean, it's nice in terms of development. With Bootstrap, the nice thing is for users. So they can bounce from one application to another and not have a lot of differentiation in terms of the user interface. They always know that they can go to the top right corner to log out of an application. They always know that there are helpful links in a menu structure in a similar pattern. Beyond that, it's nice that there are several groups using codeIgniter, so we can share code. It speeds things up. Like the OAuth plugin, I mean, I know that HR had already developed it and tested it, so I can easily implement it into my codeIgniter applications without much trouble. So that allows us to use what we call our Hawk ID authentication, which is our campus authentication. But if we wanted to use something like Facebook Auth, you know, the Google login, it's all built into this library and usable. So a nice list of applications that we use codeIgniter and Bootstrap. I referenced the research participant database that my team wrote. I was going to say they might hate me for that. So there's also a nice custom workflow application, which comes with a nice form builder application that uses codeIgniter and Bootstrap, but it also uses Marionette and Backbone. So those are those JavaScript things that I completely glossed over. But it's nice to route custom things through workflow on campus using this application. We also have an application that keeps track of compliance issues. So, you know, those dreaded HR, sexual harassment tests you have to take every year. Well, this compliance application tells you when you need to take them, and you know, if you log in on a regular basis, it will tell you, but it'll send out a notification as well. We also have our time and attendance. So most of campus staff use this application to submit their timesheets. We're in the process of building like a computer inventory system too. So yeah, we use codeIgniter and Bootstrap heavily. Now, that said, my rambling is done. You can thank me. No, I'm sorry. Thank you guys for listening. I apologize if I babbled. If you guys have any questions, I'm more than willing to try to answer them. I'll have James throw things at you. That's a good throw.
Hi. So about 3 years ago, I made a decision to use Laravel. And when I was researching codeIgniter, it essentially had died. And maybe that's inflammatory. But the company supporting it had stopped supporting it, and then they kind of passed it off. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that picked back up?
Yep.
I know another university owns the support
British
to it now.
Columbia Institute of Technology, something like that.
Okay.
They picked it up from Ellis Labs, who created it. So when they picked it up, it was in version 2.2 something. Now it's in 3.0.6. So they've launched quite a bit of improvements since then. They've depreciated a lot of things that the Ellis Lab had implemented and done things differently, like in terms of security, that's one of them. And since I've started using it, I've had regular Jira tasks for me to update, so I know that they keep continuing to improve. That's one of the things I like. I left off of here in terms of my why I chose it is the fact that it's supported by a major university institution. I'd kind of like for Iowa to do something like that, pick up a library and just run with it. But yeah, I think they have plans for even further development. They're very active in it, so it's good.
Now, how do you feel about its relevance? Because it still relies on good or bad, it still can support PHP 5.2,
Right.
but anything below 5.5 is not supported by PHP officially with security releases or anything like that. Do
Yeah.
you guys stay up to date, or?
Yeah, I want to say unfortunately and fortunately we do. That's right. I mentioned those security audits. The IT security office, if we're too far behind, will yell at us. So, we have a lot of the system admins keep us up to date. And that even gets to the point where, if you're at like 5.5.13 and, the active one is like 5.5.30, then yeah, they make sure that you update on a regular basis. So I wasn't too worried about backwards compatibility.
Okay.
One of the things that you mentioned, like I thought you were going with, is the flexibility of PHP. With PHP, you don't necessarily have to follow a framework's methodology. You can kind of do what you want. codeIgniter's no different. I mean, you can get around some of their methods, which I like and dislike. I'd mentioned to James we have a new team member, so when we were bringing her into the world of MVCs and frameworks, I kind of said, okay, you can do it the way they show you in the tutorial, but you can also do it your old way. And I'm like, until you get up to speed, why don't you just use the old way? And so the flexibility is nice, I guess. So I added a whole other answer to what you asked.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
that's good.
Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else?
You guys are just worried about lunch, I understand. Well, thank you guys again. Hopefully my first time rambling to a crowd worked. If not, don't tell me.